Hello. I wanted to go back to the theme of the end of nationalism because I truly believe that we can only solve our problems now by moving to a world level. But it would be very disastrous if we just simply move to a world government in the form that we think of governments right now. So governments feel like they have a mandate to control people. They feel that it is imperative to maintain order, and they essentially feel like they can decide how to do that. So this is based on, many times government has had to deal with countries at war, had to deal with a lot of unrest and fighting and just criminal justice. So yeah, it's quite understandable that governments feel like they have to impose order, but it's not enough. Actually, most people today would probably be more ordered without government right now. So government is causing a lot of our problems, to be honest, because generally speaking, the people of the world feel much more harmony with each other than governments seem to. For instance, the people of America mostly feel quite friendly towards the people of China. Um, but the governments seem to uh, be very competitive with each other and almost regarding each other as enemies. So this has got to go because we can't allow this to continue to dictate our lives. So then we have to think, how can we have order, but not in such a way that it's imposed from above? So then we need to actually go back a bit to, like, in the West, where did the idea of governments come from? What legitimized government? And basically, in order to understand that, we sort of need to go back to the early days of Christianity. And at that time, Jesus was teaching, right? But then Jesus died. And so it became very important for the apostles or the disciples, people who followed Jesus, to eventually to institutionalize a church. So that didn't necessarily come from Jesus' teaching. The expectation was that the kingdom of heaven would come. In fact, actually, Jesus said that. So it's a reasonable expectation, I guess. But it didn't come. So then it turned into the need for a church arose. So then how do you institutionalize a church? So with the idea that the original ideals are going to continue. So in order to do that, there had to be quite a lot of control and order. So it sort of justified having people in charge. So then we find there's a hierarchy within the church. There's bishops, there's priests, there's bishops, there's a pope, right? And each of these has a certain amount of responsibility and can make decisions on behalf of everybody. But in terms of theology, why is this justified? Right? Because Jesus wasn't really teaching about how to control people. Jesus came teaching about goodness and how to love and how to serve people. So in the early church, not the early church, actually, before the church, when the apostles and so on were trying to figure out what the church was, a lot of the thinking sort of involved the story of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden, and also, of course, the first 3 chapters of Genesis. And the reason it involved these was because initially Christianity was sort of like a Jewish sect. So Jesus was Jewish. Most of the people he taught directly would have been Jewish. And so in Judaism, they had this story of Adam and Eve, and that probably was much older than Judaism, but it was probably written down maybe about 1,000 years before the Christian era. But anyway, so this story tells how Adam and Eve were given free will, and also how that Adam and Eve essentially were created by God, and therefore they were trusted by God. They were given free will, and so it's really a story about freedom. that that God essentially endows humanity with something more than the animals. And it's so humans are on a different level, a different foundation than all the other species. So this is actually like great, right? Christianity, or the early Christians, felt that the stories of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden were a story of God giving freedom to humanity. And that was great. But then there's also the problem that Adam and Eve basically misused that freedom. And according to the story, then God threw them out of the Garden of Eden. So now this is where we see there has to be some sort of justification for creating an order. So Paul was of the opinion that humans essentially had, needed some sort of order because they had messed up and they couldn't be trusted. But there were many other people who really felt much more strongly about freedom, the message of freedom, and moral freedom. Freedom from the necessity to worship the pagan gods. Freedom from the Roman government. So Christianity grew initially because of this incredible message of freedom and the message of that humans are created directly by God and given free will. But then as time went on, eventually, probably around about the time when Augustine was teaching, this was about 400 years after Jesus's life, then Augustine, who is a very sort of respected theologian, I guess, a very influential person in Christianity, his idea was that every person is born with original sin, and there is no way to overcome original sin. Even baptism will put you sort of on Jesus's side, on God's side, but it won't overcome original sin. So there is no way, not completely anyway, there is no way then that a Christian can still have total moral freedom, and therefore everybody has to have a government, has to be subject to external government, external laws and rules of behavior. So because Augustine was so influential and his teaching is so influential, then that justified government. It justified the church government, it justified the external government. And today we have that same thing. We have a government now that is using Christianity in a way to justify its own being, its own self, right? Without the evangelicals voting in large numbers for this government and liking the idea of a Christian nation, then we wouldn't have the government that we have. So we're at a time when Christianity itself needs a lot of examination. Right? We need to look into the foundations of Christianity itself. Because the government is, in a way, it's using Christianity. It's using the ideas. It's basically a lot of a lot of the justification behind the idea of Christian nationalism is that Christianity is a sort of a religion of laws and morals, but we also have those laws and morals ourselves. We're a Christian nation. Therefore, there's no difference between the nation and Christianity. So that is sort of what is propping up the government that we have. And therefore, we need to look much more deeply at this idea of human freedom, human moral freedom, because it's very much caught up or interconnected now, intertwined with the idea of the government being able to impose laws upon us. And we can see they're looking at laws controlling our moral behavior. Okay, so we'll go into this more. Thank you.